Vikings breeze to 8-2, extend their win streak to 3, and now it's on to Chicago. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for being Locked On Vikings, your first listen of the day, each and every day. I appreciate you all so very much. My hashtag everydayers for tuning in first thing every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Go to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll for free. Today, we are recapping the 23-13 win the Vikings had over the Tennessee Titans. They are now they've won 2 in a row on the road, 3 in a row total. They've swept the AFC South, which is kind of a funny, I remember going into the season, everybody looking at that part of the schedule and saying, whoa, wow, Trevor Lawrence, Anthony Richardson, they passed on Will Levis. What about that? That's a dark horse. And all of these teams have just totally fallen apart. So let this be a lesson to you. Remember this moment next time you look at the Vikings schedule and every team looks like it could maybe win 10 games and compete for the division. Yeah, they aren't all going to do that. Some of these teams are going to suck. And this was one. And I'm not saying anything that you won't hear on Locked On Titans, right? Like the Titans are in a bad spot right now. And there is no shame in watching a team fall apart in front of you and then taking the opportunity to get that win super easy. This was a breezy one. That's really my takeaway here from the Vikings. They were, it was like a B- game for them, right? Like they made some mistakes, but you can't expect a perfect output every week. And when you do get a perfect output, even that cannot be enough sometimes, depending on the team that you're playing, right? The Vikings did not play perfectly, right? Like you look Lions versus Jaguars. They played perfectly. They hung 50 on them. Okay, cool. You beat them to a pulp. They're probably firing everybody. But we have to be clear about what your expectation is going into a game. And look, on the road against a team whose defense I very much respect. Okay, the Titans have a good defense. Putting up 23 on them, I think, is something you can hang your hat on. And beating them in a fairly no-drama way. I know there's a lot of stuff about the refs, and we're going to get into that in a lot of detail, actually. But I think the Vikings get to be proud of where they are, considering who they were supposed to be coming into the season. I mean, you remember all the stuff that I said in August, where I was I thought this year was going to be kind of a test of will, right? Like this year was going to be a tough ask, and they would be kind of in transition and rebuilding, and who knows what you're going to get out of Darnold, and is this, what's the deal with the defense? It's a hodgepodge of kind of who's that guys, and all of that has turned out well in the Vikings' favor. They are absolutely back to the form they were in September, rattling off win after win after win, against 3 kind of rough teams. I think this coming game against Chicago will be a good test because Chicago is very much okay. Right? They're 4-6. They have some things going for them, especially defensively. Any minute now, maybe there's going to be this breakout that everybody's expecting every single week. And you don't want to be the team that they do it against, right? So there's things that they can hang their hats on, but they also have all of these really bad problems, right? To me, that's an okay team. So go on the road and beat an okay team, and you kind of get a good litmus test of where you are, depending on how you play in that game. But it's always tough in the division. So we will talk about that Bears game a lot later in the week. We'll have plenty of time to do that with Crossover Thursday and the Friday episode, of course. For now, there are 2 moments in this game, this Titans game, that really stand out to me as the big moments that show you everything that the Vikings are about right now. And I like to pick ones that are kind of off the beaten path for this, ones that really, that are not the biggest EPA swing of the day, right? Like the Harrison Smith interception at the end that sealed the game. Okay, that's one that, Will Levis, under a little bit of pressure, heaves one up into double coverage in a desperation situation. It falls right in the bucket for Harrison Smith. Terrible pass, the kind of thing a young quarterback does when he's losing by 10. But for me, the way the game started is really indicative of where the Vikings are. The first drive, they get a first down. I think it was their 3rd or 4th play of the drive. They go back for a toss, and the exchange is muffed. It was a perfectly fine toss. Aaron Jones just brick hands it. And it's, Titans ball. They kick a field goal off of that drive. They get really good field position, and then they work the ball into pretty much point blank range, and it's a field goal. So it's 3-0. And the first play on the next drive was a toss to Aaron Jones. They got that ironed out. They figured it out. And Kevin O'Connell, who talks so much this year about, I have all the confidence in the world in this group. I really believe in them. And I'm going to keep showing you that I believe in them. What a proof of concept to go right back to the thing that didn't work. And there was another moment very similar to that where Jalen Nailor drops, I guess I'll call it a drop, a semi-contested pass that was a pretty good throw that would have been for a touchdown. So it's a through route. And to my live eye, which my live eye can be wrong a lot, so let put a pin in all these, grain of salt, and I'll go check on all of it. But to my live eye, they got him with a through route a lot. The through route is one we talked a little bit about on the show before. It's a concept that the Vikings have and all these McVay offenses have, where it's kind of a post route, and if you see two split safeties, you try to run between them like a normal post route. But if you see one safety, you cut off underneath it. And they have Addison do this a lot. A lot of shot plays have been through that route. Big one to Addison in a recent game. I want to say it was the Lions game that almost sealed it. That was a through route. It's one of their favorite ways to like do a clear out, but still have some value on it. And I think Nailor was running a through on this one, which meant he was going to be between the two safeties. So Darnold had to put it up between the two safeties. I thought it was left a little short of where he would have wanted it. So Nailor kind of had to slow up, and the two safeties would come back in. But regardless, he should have been able to haul that thing in. It was a little bit of an awkward one, but he should be able to haul that thing in. Next play, very next play, Nailor is the first read on a quick out. Say, no, it was a mistake. We got to work on that, but we still believe in you. And I think that is going to show what kind of coach Kevin O'Connell is. He is starting to become a favorite for coach of the year. It's probably going to be Dan Campbell, to be honest with you. There's no odds up for it yet on FanDuel, but it's something to perhaps watch. But he's going to be a candidate for coach of the year, and it's for those reasons that he has this like unwavering faith in everybody. And so when somebody like Sam Darnold makes a mistake, he had 2 fumbles in this game. When he makes a mistake, or when he throws 3 interceptions, he knows the coach is behind him, and it makes you able to go out and execute the next play with the same confidence you would otherwise have. That's so important in football. The last play can't weigh you down. You don't get to stop and feel sorry for yourself. You have to just go out and do the next one as though nothing is wrong. And I think that has made the team pretty resilient to its own mistakes, and we would love for them to not make those mistakes. But this is sort of the same thing the team has been all year. You look at any single one of these games. They're 8-2, and in 8 of the wins or both of the losses, you see a team that has done a lot of things well all game long, but then has this like speckling of really bad mistakes. That's who they are. And I don't know if that is a formula that's going to get you all the way, but it sure is one worth trying. But if it is a formula that will get you deep into the playoffs, or God forbid all the way, right? Then it's one where you have to make that mistake and be resilient to it. And I think they've proven that time and time again. And this is kind of the main lesson that I'm taking away from this game, is that they can mess up and bounce back from that mess up, which means they're never going to be that far out of it. That's something worth being proud of. And for the Vikings themselves, 8-2, no matter how you get there, is pretty good. Remember, they had some of those really convincing wins earlier in the season. This one was a convincing win. Last week was not as convincing of a win, but I think the Colts game was, even though it technically ended up a 1-score game because of some backdoor garbage time crap. Outside of the blip of a really tough Lions game and a Thursday night weird one, they've been a good team all year long. And this team right now, as it stands, they deserve to be in the playoffs. And by all means, that's where they're headed. So I do want to go into some of the more controversial moments of this one. A big long touchdown, on both sides of the ball, as well as the ref calls. So we will get into all of that next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Hillsdale is a college in Michigan, but they've got online classes that you can take from anywhere about a number of topics, like the principles of chemistry, A Christmas Carol, math, and all kinds of other things, a lot of stuff that you would see in like social studies. Hillsdale is a Christian college, so you're going to get that perspective. And if that's the kind of thing that you are into, you can head on over to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. They've got a whole bunch of classes that are free. You can get started whenever you want, try it out, see if you like what they have to say. And if so, you can move forward like that. So go to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Once again, that's hillsdale.edu/lockedon. This episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks has been my main squeeze this year in terms of how I'm doing a little bit of extra something on the side while I'm watching games that I otherwise have absolutely no connection to, like Bengals Chargers on Sunday Night Football. Put in a PrizePicks lineup and now you got something to root for. You can, of course, take whatever their given amount is. It's just you versus the house, and it's whatever players you want. So you can pick 2 to 6 of your favorite players, put them all into a lineup together, and then just choose more than, less than on their PrizePicks projection. So it's just you versus them. You're not in a big pool, none of that stuff. And if you don't like the projection that they had, of course, you can do something either more or less aggressive with their demons and their goblins. You think they've set the projection way too low? Well, you can try to up your odds with a demon or vice versa with a goblin, something more conservative. Whatever it is, you can get up to 100 times your money if you get everything right. So download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me every single day. I know I maybe sound a little gross today. I'm a little under the weather, so thank you for bearing with me if that is the kind of thing that bothers you. But let's move on to some of the key moments that I wanted to try to help explain. And the first one I want to go over is the long touchdown. So here's the situation, right? The Vikings are up 16-3. They've scored twice, 2 touchdowns. They missed an extra point. That's why it's 16. And a field goal to just the first field goal from the Titans. And they have the Titans backed up to the 1 yard line. They stop them twice. They're now at the 2 yard line going for third and I'm going to call it 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, whatever. And Will Levis hits, I believe, Nick Westbrook-Akine for a 98-yard touchdown. Hits it over the top of Josh Metellus. Nobody else is there. The Vikings had sent a blitz, so everybody was kind of on their own. There was nobody else behind Metellus, and he scampers in the rest of the way, free yards for the touchdown. It's a huge breakdown. They showed like the all 22 after the play, and I know I can now call this Palms because Kevin O'Connell called it Palmsy quarters. So I'm just going to call it Palms, even though that makes people upset. But here's how this works for the Vikings. How it's supposed to work for the Vikings. It's quarters to that side. Now, usually in quarters, you have, if you just talk about one half of the field, right? You've got one guy underneath that's like your flat player, and you've got 2 quarter zones deep, right? So how teams will try to attack that a lot of times will be to attack that flat player, and they'll try to put him in conflict or do all kinds of things to try to like mess with his read. And the way the Vikings play quarters is even worse about this because when they send people, they play their linebackers kind of inside to be over the ball to kind of basically take care of what usually the checkdowns are, or to try to sit in windows behind to try to help with their dagger problem, all that stuff. So teams love to go to the flat against that because the flat's completely unguarded. There is not a player and they do not have a flat player. And so to help with this, the major change that they've made this year was to have that outside corner, who usually just has a deep zone, is going to play Palms. Palms can adjust. It's still man outside and deep like in normal quarters where you have that deep zone. But if you see something in the flat, you can trigger on it. And if you trigger on it, then the other quarters player takes over your zone as well as his and it basically turns into cover 2. So it's cover 4 that can turn into cover 2 if it needs to. That's the beauty of Palms. They've been in it all year long. It's been awesome. So when that happens, and that's exactly what happened on this play. Is that adjustment was triggered. There was a flat player. I think it was Stephon Gilmore triggered onto that flat player. Okay, that's what he's supposed to do. And Metellus is supposed to take over that half safety and like become like a half player. So when you're a half player, you got to be deep. And so he has to go from playing an aggressive quarter zone to going deep. He has to take a really deep angle at that. He takes a very greedy angle, thinking he's going to pick it off, I think. And he ends up underrunning it, taking a too shallow of an angle, cuts over it. ball is over his head, and then suddenly he's diving for a pass breakup and he's on the ground, and then there's nobody else there to pick it up because both deep defenders have been occupied. It is a smallish, I'm not going to call it a small mistake. It's a fairly significant mistake to take a bad angle on that particular adjustment, but I wouldn't call it like a coverage bust. This wasn't a case of somebody just getting beat really bad by a route. This was like a zone issue, and the Titans, good for them, and this is what Will Levis does, is he throws, really good deep bombs, a really good go ball down there. It was a perfect, got the guy right in stride, didn't lead him out of bounds, and he was able to keep running. That's what happened on that play. On a similar touchdown, I'll go to one of the other big moments. The first touchdown the Vikings scored was a 47-yarder to Jordan Addison. They did it on dagger, where you had that through. I want to say it was Naylor on the through, but it doesn't matter because Jordan Addison was the basic and he's coming across. And this was very late in the down, so he had gotten pretty far across the field. Sam Darnold hits him right in stride, and he just turns it right upfield, and there's nobody, and it's a touchdown. So the Titans similarly were in quarters, and the quarters defender on the whole other side of the field that should have been sitting right there to come up and make the tackle, and it would have been the gain of like 20. So it was already going to be a really good play. He had moved inside to try to help the through, and I think they had another vertical or something. Like he for whatever reason had moved to the inside, and when he went to break back outside to take an angle on now this guy running across the field with the ball, he fell. He slipped and fell. That guy's Mike Brown, who the Vikings actually had in camp, I think, last year. So that's interesting. And also, speaking of former Vikings, James Lynch with a huge goal line stand here before the Vikings' other touchdown, which was a sneak after a 16-play drive with a whole bunch of penalties on it, including a huge one on a 4th and 1. We'll get to that, I promise. But beyond those, just a real quick note about a couple of the players. So Justin Jefferson passes this awesome milestone. He is now has the most receiving yards through 5 years ever. That's it. And that includes, Randy Moss, that includes Jerry Rice, Torrey Holt, all these crazy numbers. And he's still got 7 games left of his 5th year. So he is way outpacing anything that's ever happened. I would be curious to see just how far ahead he is if you era adjust it. Because what Randy Moss did in 1998 is different, right? A 100-yard receiving game in 1998 is much different than a 100-yard receiving game is now, which is still very much a feat. But back then, it was eye-popping. It was the headliner on SportsCenter, right? So good for him. You also had, I want to just shout out a good Sam Darnold game. After I was pretty harsh on him last week because he did have a bad game last week. He missed a few. He had some that were miscommunications, not necessarily his fault, but there were definitely ones that were his fault that just didn't land where he wanted to put them. Not to mention some slow decision making. The offense was bad last week. They moved the ball, but they stalled out in field goal range a whole bunch. They had a bad day, and I think more of that was on Darnold than on anybody else. And I think the offense had a day that I can feel pretty good about. Most of their possessions in the second half started to become situational. You're just trying to run the ball, get clock out, and that's fine. But first half putting up 2 touchdowns, functionally 17 points, but they missed an extra point, so 16 points in the first half. And then another touchdown that was basically the dagger, which came on a rollout, quick rollout flare out to Cam Akers, who was in with Aaron Jones. Seemed like he was a little bit in and out. Somebody asked in the chat of the postcast why Ty Chandler didn't get more run, and the answer is because he's running back 3. Cam Akers is your running back 2, so there you go. But I digress. The point is, Sam Darnold was very in control, and there were a couple of things that he did that were particularly good, even for the standard of this year, which is higher than that standard of Sam Darnold's career ever has been. Obviously, this is a career year for Sam Darnold. I don't think I even need to say that anymore. But in particular, the way he managed muddied pockets, and there were some muddied pockets, despite a change up front, by the way, which we'll get to next. But Sam Darnold was able to use those little tiny steps to either rescue those pockets or used his legs a lot in this one, made great plays on the run, accurate, decisive, and safe with the football. Outside of the literal ball security, I want 2 hands on it a little more, and getting a couple of fumbles. Outside of those, and he did recover one of them, pretty good day for Sam Darnold. One he can definitely look as, like, I'll call it a bounce back. Easy. Absolutely a bounce back from a rough day against Jacksonville. And it's nice that you can have a rough day and bounce back and just like win all the games that's a part of. That rules. I should also mention that the Vikings made a change up front. Dalton Risner started for Ed Ingram. There were whispers about this for the last like month. Once Dalton Risner, and even in camp, there was even this idea that there would be like a competition. And then Risner got hurt, kind of put a damper on that, but he's back, he's healthy, and now they're going to start to put him in. So Kevin O'Connell said after the game, I won't try to say how I thought Risner did. Really hard to see that live. I will circle back to it. I'm actually going to probably make a lot of content about that this week, so stay tuned for that. But he, after the game, Kevin O'Connell said that it's not going to be a week-to-week thing, so we can probably expect Risner for the next couple of weeks, but that there still will be competition. So I think they want to gather a sample on Dalton Risner, put him in there for 3 or 4 weeks, see how it goes, and then decide if that's how they're going to finish out the season or if they're going to finish out with Ed Ingram, and then that's probably going to be the end of the decision, whatever kind of happens after that. So we'll see what they end up doing there, but obviously that's something that has been like whispered about for a while. I'm not sure it was better. I'm not sure it was a better idea, but I'm going to kind of put a pin in it and hold off on drawing any final conclusions until I can actually like slow down and watch it at the speed I have to watch it, because I don't have a fast enough eye. So with that said, the big thing about this game was the refs. The refs were extraordinarily favorable to the Vikings. I don't think anybody can argue against that. But I want to go over some of those calls and just determine, like, was this a fake win that was like handed to them by the refs or whatever, or not? And try to be like chill about it. All right. So we're going to go into that next. This episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now you can put $5 down on whatever you want over at FanDuel and get $150 back in bonus bets if you win. Right now the Vikings are 3.5-point favorites on the road in Chicago. To open that line up, I'm sure that'll move around a whole bunch over the course of the week as we find injuries and stuff. But if you want to hit it now, go over to FanDuel. Or if you want to hit some alt line, right? Like the Vikings to score at least 3 points, which pretty much will happen. It'll be like minus 4,000. Put $5 on that, get $150 back in bonus bets, assuming that it indeed does happen. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So if you've got a hunch in the middle of a game, you've got the stats, you've got the play-by-play, everything all right there in front of you, so you can make an informed decision about what you're doing and really play this thing like a sharp. So go to FanDuel.com and join today. Put $5 down on whatever you want. You can get $150 in bonus bets if you win. That is at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Okay, time for the controversial part here of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Here's what we're going to do. So, a lot of Titans fans, and I know that Tyler over on Locked On Titans has talked about this. We will discuss this probably on Wednesday, or maybe I'll be over it and we'll talk about the Jaguars firing their head coach or whatever, because that's going to happen. But if we talk about it on Wednesday, I want to be prepared. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. And I'm going to point Tyler to this. So Tyler, this is for you. And for other Titans fans or Vikings fans that think, that the refs handed them one and that they're lucky to escape with a win. For one, 2-score game, okay? So you got to do a lot of work as refs to overcome 2 scores. But if you look at some of the controversial calls that happened in this game, I'm going to go over them all individually, but just to name them quick, there was a big hit on 4th and 1 that was called unnecessary roughness that was controversial. There was an illegal contact on a 3rd and 11 that benefited the Vikings that was controversial. There were 3 different illegal formation penalties on the right tackle that all were you lined up a little bit too far back one. All of that controversial. One of them wiped out a 51-yard touchdown pass. So a lot of a lot of swingy things, right? If you overturn that 4th and 1 unnecessary roughness, that takes 7 points off the board for the Vikings. If you overturn that illegal formation for the Titans and they get that 51-yard pass back, boom, you just made 14 points and the Titans actually win. So I can see where you would come from for that, right? That, if you overturn the calls, then the Titans win. However, first, you have to successfully argue that all those calls should be overturned, and I don't think that you can do that. And you have to kind of avoid the rest of the what-if game. Because what if the Titans took the ball over at their own 1-yard line for a second time this game, Are we sure this goes as well that time, right? What if that turns into a safety and it's a totally different game? What if they go a quick 3 and out, they punt back? Now the Vikings have the ball on the next drive at midfield. It doesn't take them as long to score. Then they kick off and we go back from like maybe that just turns out the same, right? So to really chase the rabbit on this, you'd have to like go into a world of branching hypotheticals that probably isn't responsible. And that's why here's my thing on refs before we go into all the other calls. Refs are luck. Refs are not out to get you. They are not organized enough and they are not smart enough to rig a game. I don't think that the NFL can pull that off. I don't think they have the discretion. But refs are wholly and wildly incompetent. They are completely overmatched. Their job is completely impossible, and a lot of them aren't even capable of doing a reasonable version of that job. This is my thing on refs, right? They aren't good. Every ref is bad, and sometimes you'll get the good end of it, and sometimes you'll get the bad end of it. A couple weeks ago, Vikings got the bad end of it with the face mask thing. This week, they got the good end of it. It is what it is, and if you don't want to, if you want to win the game, don't need the refs. If you need the refs to win the game, you don't really deserve to win the game. And so from a down-to-down perspective, the Vikings 100% were the better team in this game. They had a better EPA per play by a mile. They had better series success rate by a mile. They were just a better team. But if you want to say, no, those ref calls were bad and, we got to overturn them, let's go over them, okay? So early in the game, Sam Darnold scrambled this was on the first drive of the game. He scrambles for a first down. He gets pushed out of bounds a little late. Hard to see from the broadcast angle, but I would say that that's at the very least a good call, if not a borderline call that you would get like half the time. And that's kind of the way you have to approach things with refs. By the text of the law, we can frame by frame and get a much better sense for what they get live. But when calls are borderline, you just kind of expect to get half of them, and this wasn't in the good half for the Titans. Okay, 15 yards for the Vikings then, and they would end up fumbling on that drive anyways, so whatever. And then the Titans would go all the way back. They would get inside the 15. So if you wanted to say that 15 yards was like decisive, you could, but I feel like you're reaching because, a play at the 30 would be defended differently and probably called differently if it were instead at the 15. So, like things would just be a lot different from there. But that's something to kind of couch away. There was also an offsides on a 4th and 1 during the big long touchdown drive that ended up in that big 4th and 1. But there was another 4th and 1 earlier where the Vikings snuck it, probably didn't get it, but T'Vondre Sweat was very offsides. That probably caused the sneak not to work, right? Like that little extra bit of space was probably the difference and was correctly called a penalty. So that's a mistake by the Titans, but it certainly isn't the refs handing them anything. Then, of course, there is the big hit. It was generally called unnecessary roughness. It wasn't called, helmet to helmet. It wasn't called this or that, or hit against a defenseless player. However, in the pool report after the game, the refs pool report, they did say that they didn't call that helmet to helmet, that was not a helmet to helmet call, that it was an unnecessary roughness call for a hit to the chest or neck area, which was where it hit, of a defenseless receiver. And the key is that Mike Brown launched, that he left his feet for that hit. He got his head out of the way well, but that's not all you have to do. You can't leave your feet for that kind of hit and light up a defenseless player, which Jordan Addison definitely counts as. So I would be curious to hear the argument against that. He did launch. Addison was defenseless. By the text of the rule, that's a 15-yard penalty or half the distance to the goal. So that's one of the big ones, right? And I do think that at the end of the day, that does turn into the right call. I would have said, oh, that's a horrible call. Live, I thought he did hit the face mask. I was wrong about that. But now reading the pool report, okay, the refs also didn't think that he hit the face mask. I was the only idiot that thought he saw the face mask. So I'll take that L. Later on in the game, there was a horse collar penalty that wasn't a horse collar penalty. It was on Brandon Powell on a punt return. The defender got both the shoulder pads and dragged him down, and it looked very horse collar to a live eye, so they threw the flag, but it was not one. You could argue that it was a hip drop tackle, which is, by text of the rules, supposed to be a 15-yard penalty, but I don't think they've thrown one flag on those all year at all. So I don't think it would be right to expect that flag. So I think you would probably be okay saying, that probably shouldn't have been flagged and that was a bad call that favored the Vikings. The Vikings marched all the way into field goal range and kicked there, but obviously maybe 15 yards changes that, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe something about being past the 40 and being into, touchdowny range makes Kevin O'Connell dial up really dumb shot plays more or something like that, right? And maybe they would have just like gotten 2 more first downs easily and then stalled in the same spot on the field. This is the problem with the branching hypothetical thing. There was, I think maybe the one that Titans fans are most correctly aggrieved about is a 3rd and 11 on the Vikings' last scoring drive of the game. It was 16-10, and they went up 23-10 on this one. And the Vikings had a 3rd and 11 and threw an incomplete pass, but there was an illegal, or I think they took a sack, but there was an illegal contact penalty on Justin Jefferson. I think that call was horrible. I think that was an absolute travesty of a call. Glad my team got the better end of a bad call, but I think that one was bad. The corner, whose name is escaping me, was initiated the contact well within 5 yards and just kept it through 5 yards. My understanding of that rule, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of that rule is if you initiate your contact like at the line of scrimmage or within that 5 yards, and you carry it through 5 yards, and now you still have that same contact, you're allowed to do that. As long as you let him go as soon as he tries to break away, you don't grab, you don't tug, you don't do anything like that. So I think that was a really bad ticky-tack call. Were it not for that call, the Vikings would have punted. The Titans had all the momentum. Maybe that goes a lot different. But again, you have to like branch out and kind of say, and then the Titans would also have won the rest of the game, which you can't necessarily say. And then the last one is the illegal formations. Again, I'll look at the pool report where they asked, hey, was he warned? And they said, yes, he was warned once. And then after that, it's on him. So here's my deal on these. I think they're really inconsistently enforced, and it's really hard for linemen who are very good at being precise about where they split. Like offensive line splits, if you know anybody who's played or coached O-line, like they will tell you, you got to be 18 inches across from, the next guy or 24 inches or whatever you're doing. You can even play with that and say, okay, we're going to do a wide split or a narrow split here for a particular run concept or for pulling. And where they line up is usually aligned to the guy next to them. So the center lines up on the ball, the guards line up as far back as they're going to line up, and the tackles line up as far back, but they align themselves with the guard. So whatever is in the Titans operation needs to be changed, but I don't know if they're going to know how to change it if this isn't consistently enforced. So I think Titans fans do get to be a little bit upset about that. However, the same penalty was called 4 different times, including the one warning that the pool report said that right tackle got. So they were unable to fix that problem, and it continued to harm them throughout the game. It's hard to know, like, what was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to change the way he lined up? Did he change the way he lined up? And it just was insufficient, and then nobody told him that. Like, there's all kinds of like communication things that could make that even more frustrating. But again, at the end of the day, if you needed the refs to not make it a 2-score loss, you didn't deserve to win. And the Vikings were very much the better team in this one. You can send me your questions whenever you want on Twitter or via the Google form in the show notes. So that one you can fill out anytime. You can also send me an email whenever at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. I will see you all tomorrow to answer those questions. And as always, Skull.